Why were the SALT talks important? Why were the strategic arms limitation talks important? Let's take a closer look at this fascinating chapter from the 1960s. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, were a series of negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. These talks began in 1969 and marked a shift in how the two superpowers approached their rivalry. Instead of just confrontation, they started to engage in dialogue and cooperation. This change was especially significant during the 1960s, a decade filled with fear of nuclear war. The SALT talks represented a hopeful sign that both nations were willing to find common ground. The first agreement, known as SALT-I, was signed in 1972. It included the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and an interim agreement on strategic offensive arms. These agreements were important because they limited the development of anti-ballistic missiles and froze the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missiles at existing levels. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty was particularly noteworthy. It restricted each side to only one area for deploying anti-ballistic missiles. This limitation meant both nations remained vulnerable to each other's strategic forces, maintaining a balance of deterrence known as mutually assured destruction. This balance, while risky, played a key role in preventing either side from launching a nuclear attack. The fear of catastrophic consequences kept the peace, even in a tense environment. Following SALT-I, the second round of talks, known as SALT-Roman II, began in 1972 and wrapped up in 1979. Although SALT-Roman II was never ratified due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, both nations informally followed its terms. This willingness to adhere to agreements, even during tough times, showed a commitment to arms control. From a nostalgic viewpoint, the SALT talks symbolize a moment when the superpowers recognized the dangers of unchecked nuclear weapons and sought to manage their arsenals. This effort was a step toward reducing the existential threat that loomed over the world in the 1960s. In practical terms, SALT introduced predictability into United States and Soviet relations by setting limits on nuclear capabilities. This predictability helped reduce the risk of accidental war. While these talks did not lead to complete disarmament, they were an essential step in arms control. They paved the way for future negotiations like the Strategic Arms Reduction talks. In summary, the SALT talks were important because they demonstrated a willingness by the superpowers to engage in dialogue and limit their nuclear arsenals. This effort provided a measure of stability during a volatile time in history, making the world a safer place.